Hi guys, this is Taylor and I'm here today with my May wrap-up, and someone has decided to start mowing their lawn right as I turned on the camera, so I apologize if you can hear anything. It might get kind of louder and softer. They have a giant yard, so I don't want to try and wait it out because it might be the end of the day before I get to film. This month, reading-wise, was kind of great, and I don't really know why. I read 7 books, and one of them is definitely one of the best books that I've read this year, and I'm assuming this is going to be a long video, so let's just jump right into it. The first book I read in May was The Namesake by Jhumpa Lahiri. This is an author that I'd of course seen around and been interested in, and then I was assigned this book for my sociology class this semester. This is a family saga, and a surprisingly succinct family saga given the depth of the story and the characters. We follow a Bengali couple in an arranged marriage as they move from Calcutta to Cambridge, Massachusetts. And then we follow their son Gogol, who is named after Nikolai Gogol, as he grows up and tries to make a life for himself that sometimes falls outside of the expectations of what his parents want for him. And I have to say right off the bat that Jhumpa Lahiri's writing style is exquisite. I really want to say that she has one of the most beautiful writing styles I've ever read. If you've ever read something where it almost seemed like every word was almost preordained to be there and the writer just put the words all together on the page, that's what this book felt like. I also feel like this had the single best depiction of a second-generation immigrant experience that I've ever read. I said this in my most recent video, but it really feels like she captured exactly what it must feel like to be a second-generation immigrant and kind of stranded between the culture of your parents and the culture of your home country and never really feel accepted by either culture. So I honestly loved this book. It absolutely exceeded my expectations, and I highly recommend it if it sounds like something that you might be interested in. The one drawback for me, and I never really figured out why this was, I would read this book for an hour and I would only get like 20 pages read, and it's not like it has particularly small text or small margins. I guess it's just kind of a slow read, and not even in the pacing or anything like that, just in the actual time that it took me to read it. So that was mildly frustrating, but aside from that, I really don't have any complaints. So this was a really strong 4 stars for me, and again, I really recommend it if you haven't checked it out already. Next, I picked up the 2 autobiographies of my favorite figure skater, Yuzuru Hanyu. So we have Blue Flames and Blue Flames 2. As expected, these were great reads for a big-time fan like me, even in translation. The writing style is very basic. Even though these are marketed as autobiographies, they're more just kind of cobbled together from old interviews and press statements with a little bit of added commentary sprinkled on top. So there isn't really a writing style to speak of, but that doesn't mean that it wasn't an enjoyable reading experience. This kind of insight and information is kind of invaluable to me. These are chronological, so the first one covers his life from birth to 2012, and this one covers 2012 to 2016 when it was released. And because of that, the second one was a lot more interesting to me, just because the events in his life that occurred in this time period, including him moving to Toronto to train with Brian Orser, winning his first Olympic title, and unfortunately sustaining multiple injuries that could have been career-ending but weren't, including one that I was present for and had to witness with my own 2 eyes. Gosh, that was fun. So it was, of course, just really significant to get insight into his life like that, and like I said, pretty priceless to me. I wouldn't really recommend these unless you're also a fan, simply because I don't know that they would interest you, and it might be kind of difficult to get your hands on these, and then in turn to get the translation that you would need to read these if you don't read Japanese. But for me, reading both of these was a long time coming, and I gave them both 4 stars. Next, I picked up Paradigm by Alan Glynn. This is a book that I had never heard anything about. I just saw it in the library one day and the synopsis really intrigued me. This is a thriller, I guess? Maybe slightly sci-fi thriller about a guy who was stationed in Afghanistan, and then he comes back home and finds employment at a fancy restaurant in Manhattan, and then one day he's working in the restaurant and he sees a man dining there who looks exactly like him, and he's dealing with some stuff from the war. His life is kind of falling apart, he needs an outlet, so he becomes obsessed with this other man, and the story really takes off from there. I really enjoyed this, despite it not really being exactly what I thought it was. I thought it might be more of a literary thriller, which I don't really think it is. But I think one of the strengths of this novel is that it's kind of ridiculous and implausible, and you just have to suspend belief and hang on for the ride, because it is quite a wild ride. The bottom line for me is that I was really entertained by this book and really engrossed. I probably read most of it in about a day and a half. A drawback for me was that it did have a little bit more military intrigue than I would really like, but the majority of it is in the first few chapters and it's not really much of a factor later on. But yeah, my final verdict on this is that I really enjoyed it, despite it being pretty much out of my comfort zone and not really what I expected it to be. I gave this 3 stars, but that does feel a little bit low in retrospect, and I think I would also feel okay giving it 4 stars. Then I picked up Loner by Teddy Wayne, which is my surprise come from behind winner for the month. Loner is both a book that is very difficult to talk about and very difficult to recommend. It's difficult to talk about because if I tell you why this is an important novel, it'll give away the end and the intent and just the whole shebang, and it's difficult to recommend because as a novel it is massively uncomfortable and it's definitely not for everybody. I can tell you that this is about a Harvard University freshman named David who is endlessly pursuing another freshman who happens to be very rich and very pretty. I've heard some reviews talk about how this is a novel about obsession, but I really don't think that's quite it. Without giving too much away, I think this is more about how some men just feel entitled to women and why that is such a colossal problem. David is the narrator and we are privy to all of his innermost thoughts, and that starts out as just kind of cringy and uncomfortable, and throughout the course of the novel it just becomes something entirely different. For me, a big part of the journey of this book was reading it and hating every moment that I was inside this character's brain. Like I said, this is a very uncomfortable read. If you need to like your characters, if you need to relate to your characters, if you need to understand your characters, if you are particularly affected by sexual assault, don't read this. If Loner still sounds interesting to you, I would say maybe give it a try. I'm not gonna say definitely go out and read this because the reading experience is just so... But this was a really strong 4-star to me, and I'm ultimately glad to have read it. Next up is a book that can be seen from space, and that is The Glitch by Elizabeth Cohen. I really hope the neon colors really come across here because this, in real life, it genuinely kind of hurts to look at, although it's kind of beautiful. This is a new release for May, and you are going to laugh when I tell you the basic gist of the plot. This is about a high-powered CEO named Shelley Stone who one day comes into contact with a young woman who looks exactly like her. It's basically the plot of Paradigm. And I swear to God, I did not do that on purpose. As a novel though, this is very, very different from Paradigm, and the plot just goes in a completely different direction. So I had seen this marketed as like borderline chick lit, which I really don't think it is. The tone is very light and funny, but it's also a pretty strange novel, and it's a strange writing style. Some scenes are kind of written in a dreamlike way, which I think is an interesting way to represent how overworked and frazzled this character is. Speaking of which, the main character Shelley is written to be kind of insufferable. The novel opens on her and her husband on vacation in France, and suddenly their 4-year-old daughter goes missing, and neither one of them wants to end their business calls in order to go look for her, which is a pretty apt introduction to their characters. Basically, I thought some aspects of this novel were pretty cool and interesting, but it ultimately just didn't impress me. It didn't have much of a drive behind it, and the whole thing was kind of unsatisfying. But like I said, I liked aspects of this book, so it was kind of a middle of the road read for me. I'm pretty sure I gave it 3 stars. And if I had to pick between this and Paradigm, just because their plots are so similar, I think I would go with Paradigm, which is kind of hilarious to me. And last but not least, in May I read Queer City Gay London from the Romans to the Present Day by Peter Ackroyd. Don't think I need to really elaborate what this book is about. It's pretty much all in the title. This is a relatively short nonfiction book, which was quite digestible because it was broken up into many short chapters. The writing style I was not really sold on. It seemed like the writing style would go from very colloquial and then the next paragraph would just read like a Wikipedia article. I did think it was very interesting. I did think it was well researched. My other main gripe though would have to be that it did not really dedicate a lot of time to the AIDS crisis. And just considering that the AIDS crisis is something that has been continually overlooked and sometimes even downplayed by historians, that was just kind of disheartening. So I gave this 3 stars. I was kind of disappointed by it, but I still think that the subject matter was really interesting, and I'm glad to have this corner of history collected here, despite any flaws that the actual book might have. And very, very quickly before I go, my dog is snoring. This video is such a nightmare. I just wanted to mention that I did DNF a book, and that is Beauty Queens by Lippa Bray. This was supposed to be one of the 10 books that I had challenged myself to read this year, but I'm taking it out of contention. I am donating it, and the reason that I decided to DNF Beauty Queens was actually because I was watching old Books and Lala videos, because I have been obsessed with her recently, and she had read this book and had said something like she didn't click with this book initially, but she powered through, but then by the end of the book her feelings hadn't changed whatsoever. And those were just the magic words that I needed to hear, because I had started the book and I was not vibing with it, and I really just had this gut feeling that my reading experience was not going to change no matter how far I got with the book, and Books and Lala just validated the heck out of me. So thank you, and shout out. I know you're not watching this. So that was May, and it was kind of a lot, but I'm happy with how it turned out. And I just want to say really quickly that I will be doing Japanese June this year. I don't know if anybody else is doing it, but so I will have a TBR for you coming hopefully within the next few days or so. Let me know how your reading went in this past month, and I hope you're having a great day, and I'll see you soon. Bye!